How is everyone doing? I hope all of you got a solid night of rest last night because we are going to keep this party going. My name is Deepa. I'm a software engineer here on the community team at Figma. And outside of work, I'm also an artist and muralist. And today, I'm going to be your host for the next few hours. I just want to get a quick sense of who's in the room right now. So show of hands, make some noise if you flew in for config. Nice. I live in San Francisco, so I just had to take an Uber down here, but it is such a treat to have people from all over here together. What about show of hands, make some noise if this is your very first config? Yeah, welcome. What about your second, third, or fourth config? Okay. Good to see you again. As you make your way around the conference for Config Day 2, we encourage you to share your adventures on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, wherever you spend time on the internet these days. And we also have a hashtag for you. You guessed it. It's hashtag Config2023. Hopefully that one's easy enough to remember. Next slide. OK, and now what all of you are really here for, our talk. Our first speaker will be delving into a pretty big, sometimes thorny, but always fascinating topic. And no, I am not talking about AI this time. I'm talking about the web. And as the creator of Next.js and CEO and founder of Vercel, which empowers developers to build a more personalized web, there are few people better positioned to talk about this topic than Guillermo Rauch. In this talk, Guillermo will talk about the Frontend Cloud, what it enables, and how it's bringing design and engineering closer together, and why the web is a rich surface for design and development that every builder and company should be thinking about. So with that, I'll hand it over to Guillermo.
Thank you so much. Hey, folks. It's amazing to be here today because as a builder for the web, I've been caring so much about design throughout my entire history as a software engineer. So you might know Vercel because of our color scheme that we prefer and monochrome design tools. And for Next.js as well, which is this front-end framework that is enabling folks to create and go from idea to global application on the web in seconds. So by the end of this talk, I want to make the point that the internet that we'll have by the end of the decade will be unrecognizable if we all come together to build the best possible products for the end users that are designed first. Designers and engineers, empowered with the right tools, can craft new, unique experiences that will completely reshape the products that we deliver every day. And the platform that we will do this on is the web. The web of old is probably what we think about when we think about just simple websites. But products like Figma have shown us that the lines between a website and a web application are becoming more and more blurry every day. Just think about the idea of sharing someone a hyperlink, and then an application comes alive that allows you to design from within the web browser. It almost seems like a miracle, and before Figma came around, it was almost unthinkable. The web has become so powerful with new APIs, new technologies that enable applications to become real-time and to basically become alive right in front of your eyes. And what's really awesome about the web is that, again, it's really free, so anybody can contribute to the web. Of course, I think for the vast majority of people, that's been a read-only experience. We've been consuming the web. But today, I want to make the case that we can make building for the web a lot easier. And even though products like Figma have shown us what the web enables at its best, I think the primary issue that we've had as an industry is that design and engineering have had this massive gap in between. When we think about who has access to creating the best possible products, there's just a series of obstacles in between an idea and its successful deployment in production. And to make matters worse, I think we've sort of over-indexed on a lot of engineering relative to how much we've invested in design sometimes. And I think this is not just because we got it wrong. Over the past few decades, with the rise of the cloud and the new ways of delivering software over the internet and the rise of mobile, we had to lay out a lot of the foundations of the internet from an engineering point of view that were those parts of an application that are invisible. You're going to hear me talk a lot about making infrastructure invisible or go away or automating it, because I really believe that we have the best starting point that we've ever had because of all that massive investment that we've made into our engineering foundations over the last couple decades. And ultimately, I think this underlines the point that design is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's a starting point for how we should think about building software. So if we spend a ton of time just building those invisible bits and recreating them at the beginning of every project, then we're missing out on a huge opportunity to lead with design. So consider the best possible designs and experiences that you've seen on the web. What I think they have as a common factor is that they've enabled a deeper human connection. The best possible products that you can deliver are personalized. They remember who you are. They remember your preferences, your language, your currency, your previous recommendations or suggestions or things that you've visited all sort of become inputs into the UI that's being crafted. It's almost like the design is actually really fluid because it comes alive in the form of a front-end experience that gets dynamically generated and rendered just for you. And that's what I think enables that deeper human connection between the creator and the visitor through this awesome medium that is the web. But how do we actually get there? How do we get to that ideal product that, again, knows exactly who I am and what I want out of that particular interaction? And if I look at the evolution of the web since the very beginning, it actually went from what you see here with Amazon, for example, at the very beginning. What happens when you don't have all those great foundations? What happens when you don't have all that incredible infrastructure? You're probably most concerned with just getting online and trying to make something happen, doesn't break, and stays online. And when you think about it, when you're actually sitting on top of great foundations, I think it's not a coincidence that for Amazon to create this personalized, snappy web experience that we're all familiar with because I've been there so many times and I keep returning as a loyal customer, to get there, they had to build a ton of that invisible infrastructure I talked about. They built AWS, which now they've exported as a public service for us to leverage. The same happens with a lot of these giants of the web. So if you look at Google, same story, early mover, defines a lot of what's even possible with the cloud and the web. They pioneered distributed systems, new kinds of databases. And now all those foundations, papers, discoveries are what are enabling this new kind of product experiences. And it's not just about sort of changing the style a little bit. I'm talking about enabling a front-end experience that, in this case, combines generative AI, your preferences, the context of your visit, in order to create an experience just in time that gets you the information or the goods that you want with just your input. Now, when I look at also the history of the web from the perspective of tooling, I also find this disparity between design and engineering tools that have almost been like two different axes of evolution, right? So we've been having a convergence that has been emergent, but initially the tools targeted, okay, this is the tool for the designer, this is the tool for the engineer. What I want to call out is, I think, the most radical or pivotal point in my career that kind of led to me creating frameworks like Next.js and starting Vercel was the emergence of React. Because when React came out, and again, having that sort of preference for good design and care for design that I had as my background, I saw that, okay, this tool can actually really help catalyze that connection between design and engineering. And the critical missing piece in the puzzle for me was the introduction of the component. When I used to work as a JavaScript engineer, most of my discussions with teammates, colleagues, clients would be around kind of like the building blocks of programming languages. Like, oh, we have this function, this method call, this algorithm, this data structure. When React came out, I think it changed the vocabulary of how we talk and how we collaborate in a team, because now we're saying, OK, let's create a component. Oh, that component is inspired in the conception that we had as a component in Figma. So what's happening is that over time, we're creating this common language and common abstraction for how we can bring these two worlds together. And that's, I think, particularly exciting because it inspires me to rethink how I develop software. The old conception of developing software started from those primitives, from those foundations. It started from like, OK, let's come up with the algorithm, the databases, the cloud infra, the DevOps, all that kind of stuff is what I would talk about like 10, 15 years ago. Nowadays, I can just start with like, OK, like what can we come up with? Where can we innovate with Figma? Where can we innovate, and how can we quickly test it out with Next.js? How can we quickly deploy it and put it in front of users? And the case for doing this is not just my personal preference. Of course, like that was my background. I would have a bias. I have some skin in the game. But when I think about what this enables for companies to start front-end first, I think about all the great qualities of what really sets companies apart in a digital world. I think about accessibility. I think about usability. I think about crafting a web experience that is truly unique to my brand. So going back to those old images of Amazon, Google, Craigslist, they almost all look the same, right? Like gray background, blue hyperlinks. But to be able to really express myself and communicate what I stand for and what my brand values are, that starts with the front end. And again, if I have a successful product that enables that kind of experience, I get a returning loyal customer. And if you are finding yourselves needing the hard data to sort of substantiate that this kind of investment priority is good for your business, for your companies, I really like to call attention to this essay or study that came out a few years ago. So if you've been in the web perf world, if you've been sort of paying attention to what's been happening on the sort of engineering side of things, one of the common memes that I always hear in different Zoom presentations is Amazon found that for 100 milliseconds of latency, they would see a 1% improvement or decrease in sales. So if you render Amazon 100 milliseconds slower, you lose 1% of sales. Now, the interesting thing that observation was made in the old world of that old desktop machine. So it was desktop web. So a couple of years ago, Google commissioned a study with Deloitte to look at what happens now that we've increasingly, I think, as a collective, we've become a little more impatient with these web experiences. And we have mobile phones, and we tap on ads or tweets or chats, and we have a hyperlink, and I tap it, and I have to be able to act immediately. So they found that instead of 100 milliseconds improving 1%, it lifted conversion by 8%. It's actually extremely dramatic across lots of different industries like travel, luxury, fashion, marketing. So the shift to the front end is not just a business priority. You're going to find it also in where are developers gravitating to. When you overhear engineers talk, when you go to a hacker school, when you try to find like what are the latest tools to create a new thing, you're going to find that the approaches that were predicated on sort of let's build up monolithically and let's almost like bring all the tools into one place and let's focus a lot on the database and all those more kind of the invisible parts that I talked about, that's kind of flattening a little bit in interest. And what we're seeing is this rise in what developers are talking about, asking about, and trying to provide or ask questions about. It's gravitating towards our world of front-end and, by extension, design. So I think it's a really exciting shift. Now, what does this mean for the consumer? So how do you tell that you've been able to prioritize front end instead of those undifferentiated bits. So one of the things that I think about is this transition from a static web to a dynamic web. So if I start with the front end, I kind of start thinking about, okay, like, how can I make my experience as immersive as possible, as app-like as possible? I think about, okay, infinite loading lists that render videos that are powered by a machine learning algorithm. I think about customizing my viewport and my experience according to viewport and device. I think about modal experiences. And these are all things that are unlocked by the front ends. I mean, you could upgrade your database, you could upgrade your infra all day long, but you wouldn't be unlocking the kind of experiences that have now come to sort of define the best products that consumers use today. And this inspired us to kind of rethink the way that we can craft a platform for creating software. What would it look like if you start creating your next application front end first? What would you prioritize, and where would you start? So we came up with this conception of the front-end cloud that starts with the framework. You choose a framework like Next or Svelte, and you start implementing your design intentions. You don't start by saying, okay, what kind of underlying bits do I need to provision? You don't start with AWS. You don't start with Google Cloud. You start with designing your application, very quickly transforming that into front-end code, and then deploying it. And now what I want to call out that is really interesting about this inversion of priorities is that because you're not building sort of the backends, now you have an infinite amount of choice about which backend to use. So this comes in two shapes. One is, instead of rebuilding my payment infrastructure from scratch, I use a Stripe over the network. I connect it very easily to my front end. You've probably seen things like Stripe Elements. They're giving me React components that are already pre-implemented, and I can sort of layer my design on top really quickly. So now, because I started with the front end, I'm becoming more efficient, and I'm choosing something that is an off-the-shelf solution for my backend. The other possibility that it opens up is we all live in a world of legacy software, right? Like, most of the data in the world is already spoken for. It lives in, I don't know, like Southwest's, airline sort of database, and that kind of system that has been, around for decades. So how do you go about modernizing that? How do you go about making sure that your design intent matches up with the real world actually has to offer? So you can also connect to your data systems as they exist today. So by separating these two worlds, the front and the back end, not only do I get that flexibility, I actually get to modernize the systems that already exist. And for us, this has become the reason for why Vercel invests in everything that we create, from open source to our infrastructure. We want to be that front-end cloud that really empowers you to think, come up with an idea, and be able to develop, preview, and ship it globally at the moment that you come up with it. So we've all had that experience of, I have a new idea, I open up Figma. What if you could do that for software? What if you could transform that idea into a real-world product in seconds? And I've talked a lot about sort of our priority starting with that application, that user interface. This is not to dismiss the very important underlying cloud. It's just inverting the priority. So when you deploy on Vercel, for example, we convert your application, your framework code, into the really awesome primitives that exist that make sites really fast. So using serverless technologies, using CDNs, all those things are necessary. And we want to piggyback on that massive amount of infrastructure and engineering investment that we talked about in the beginning that felt disproportionate, but was ultimately really necessary. And for me, just getting to that fast result and whatever, 100 millisecond, 200 millisecond, those are awesome milestones. But the other thing that I think about a lot is if I'm trying to craft an experience and I can reuse a lot of what already exists, what does that mean for how fast I can iterate? And what does that mean for even arriving to the right result? So the meme that I always think about when I think about being a software engineer is I'm giving a task, and I go out into the woods for a couple of months, and 3 months later, I emerge with the result. And in the process, folks were like, how is it going? And I'm like, great, and here's a pull request. It looks good. The test passed. What I get a lot of inspiration from Figma is you can actually see in real time what everybody else is working on, right? And if we can do that for the software that we're creating and the actual products that we're shipping, that informs the next step, right? So instead of that caricature of it works on my machine, I swear, I'm like iterating, and I come up with new ideas. I might need to refactor something. Someone might find a bug that I hadn't considered. Maybe rethink the whole thing. And this is why, by the way, we talk about velocity and not just speed. Speed is, I could go back and forth. I could just be running in circles. When I think about getting the right direction for my product, I think about, I need to put this in the world in the hands of others. And what better way to put things in the hands of others than the URL? So when I mentioned why we build on the web, the secret weapon of the web, the unreasonable advantage that it has is the URL. I love me a native app, but you've all been through the process of getting a test flight and downloading like 300 megabytes of apps before you get to something, or files, right? Like getting that file from some program and then like downloading the app for it. These are, again, the very things that Figma eliminated for designers, right? Like, here's my link, boom, works. Can we do that for every iteration of code? Can we actually transition from, here's my diff in my source control system, to here's my product diff. Here's my live thing that, again, connects to those data services that I'm already sort of relying on, so real data. Concretely, what it means is, the workflow of an engineer would be, okay, I started with a framework like Next. I write up my implementation. Notice that you see a bunch of components on the screen that will have parity with the components that you're designing on Figma. And then once you push, is really when that deployment URL comes in. So instead of just giving you a hyperlink to the code, like the Git systems do, you get a hyperlink to the product. And you can share that with everybody. So you can use our Slack integration, or you can DM it to somebody. And really what this empowers you is that, again, like you get into that really quick iteration cycle of like, boom, here's the product, here's the product, here's the product. Now, why would I want such a thing? So for me, like reality hits when I use Safari, for example. And I find that, like, my typeface doesn't look quite right, or you've all seen typefaces that sort of shift around, and we all have our own sort of pet peeves about how things pan out in the real world. So let's get to testing in the real world as soon as possible. And as I mentioned from the 100 millisecond 8% thing, the real world is also mobile web, right? So take that URL, send it over to your mobile phone, and test it out with the real world conditions, right? Like there's in-app browsers. You have to test how that URL performs when you open it from Twitter. And Twitter decides to have a mini web browser in there as opposed to the full web browser. And there is Chrome for iOS and Chrome for Android. And so you get the gist of like how much more information you get from being able to actually deploy your product very quickly. Performance, of course, is something you're going to be able to test with real-world production infrastructure. This is not a screenshot of the product. This is the actual product using those heavily optimized production primitives of the cloud. But of course, this wouldn't be enough for us if we just gave you like a read-only thing, when we know that a lot of the disruption that has happened in software over the last decade with things like Notion, Google Docs, Figma is about empowering real-time sort of synchronization of what everybody is working on. So Vercel introduces this toolbar into your preview deployment URLs that enhances the experience. The very first thing I want to call out is all of those git push actions that you take result in an infinite number of parallel environments that all load instantly. So what I can do is I can go and check what everybody else in the company is working on. What is Al working on? What is Jenny working on? How does that relate to the thing that I'm working on? Are we on the same page? And again, if you think about the old conception of software, this would have been you taking a look at a bunch of pull requests or diffs, and you kind of get lost in what is the actual thing that we're pushing forward? What are the initiatives that are ongoing? If you're a little removed from the engineering process, you actually also get more effective of a look into the progress of projects, right? It's like seeing is believing for me. So if I can go and tap on an environment and it opens instantly, it makes me more effective. The next thing is, okay, I got my environment there. What about giving you feedback, right? So we introduced comments. One advantage that we have when we think about comments is because we have a deep integration with the front-end stack, we can anchor your comments to the actual implementation. So we understand that if I left a comment there, it's attached to the component node that was rendered by Next and React. I understand that it's attached to the underlying DOM structure, and all of this is in the service of, for example, if I change the implementation of that component, the comment can actually automatically get resolved. Maybe I decided to get rid of that iteration, that component. So the comment about should I change the color just doesn't even make sense anymore. As you know, with software, it's always hard to just get everything buttoned up for every pull request. So we give you the opportunity to also file it with one click into your issue tracking tool of choice. So we integrate with Linear, for example. So you take that comment, and the engineer can decide, I'm going to tackle this later. Because this ties into the engineering lifecycle, these comments are actually becoming parts of the CI/CD process of the application that you're developing. So this is particularly powerful because let's say you're not an engineer, but you have a very important and critical piece of feedback that should actually block the release of a certain feature. Maybe something is just downright unacceptable, not working well, not just about like pixel perfect, but it actually doesn't work well. So what happens is when I leave that comment, it actually blocks the merging of the PR in the software development lifecycle. So this is what we, is getting a taste of how can we invite non-engineers into actually building real-world software and contributing to it. And in terms of that, I think having that panoramic view of what everybody is sort of commenting on, filing away, reacting to, not just in like this particular front end where if you look at the URL, the initiative says I'm working on the new homepage branch, but this is across branches. It's across front end initiatives. Tools like Next allow you to model problems like like in this case, a news website, which is like content-oriented. But there's also applications like mobile TikTok and ChatGPT that are built with Next.js. So what ends up happening is that you can now start commenting on every part of your sort of product lineup, not just the blog, not just the marketing page, but also the actual product experiences that could be heavily dynamic. The real world of data comes with some interesting challenges. If we go through this laundry list of like, let's make everything super accessible, super easy, let's just try to point and click, the natural next thing that we would enable is, what about editing the actual product, right? Like, what about changing copy? What about changing text? So we mentioned earlier that with our conception of the Frontend Cloud, we started with the principle that we need to connect to the real world systems. So in practice, what ends up happening with sites is that content comes from a CMS, a headless CMS, or some kind of API. So we introduced this capability that we call draft mode. And really what it does is that it allows you to visualize what pieces of the page have come from those data systems. So I get this visual feedback. This is a part of the page that was dynamically rendered. And now I can actually go and edit it in a way that ties into that content lifecycle. So this would allow you to edit it inline, and then dispatch the change as a draft into your CMS. We call this technology visual editing, and it's been It's based on an open spec that we collaborated with Sanity on. Sanity is a headless CMS. And really what it enables is, think of it as tagging text over the internet. So just like your luggage gets tagged at the airport, every piece of text on this screen got an invisible tag of what data system in the universe produced it. Our front-end rendering system is aware of that. So now I know that came from that particular CMS. And this solves a few very interesting challenges. Number one, as companies get bigger, I never know what CMS should I be logging into to actually change the text. Number two, the reality of products at scale is not just, oh, I can quickly edit, press save, and it's live, it needs review. There is news websites today run A/B tests, so there actually may be 3 permutations of this headline. And my idea of like, oh, I'm just going to edit it in line might actually not be sufficient to get it over the line. There's also translation, right? Like maybe this is translated into 18 different languages. So that's why we also annotate the UI so that you can actually click and go to that CMS and actually perform a comprehensive change to the content. With all these tools, we're narrowing in on this mission of bringing design and engineering as close as they've ever been. But I think there's more work and more opportunities out there. One of the things that really inspired me about a lot of the demos that I've seen at Figma Config so far is we're all thinking about ways that we can incorporate AI to just remove the obstacles between creativity and the things that we want to put out into the real world. And one of the things that we're thinking a lot about is, what if AI could be the thing that allows you to not even need to code as much anymore? And I don't mean just from the point of view of, I go back to the editor and it suggests some recommendation. I think about not even starting from the point of view of the editor. I think about it starting from the point of view of the product and suggesting a transformation to that front-end project. So these are things that are being opened up. We're thinking about adding more tools, like being able to very easily visualize the other states that your product is in. So again, when products get at scale, usually they involve feature flags and experiments. What if I can also visualize them in parallel? What does this page have to offer? And what changes could I suggest back to my team? Ultimately, this is the best time to start building because everybody can contribute to building great software. We have the best tools available at our disposal, and a lot of this is open source, which means you can actually get it started for free and very easily. So if you want to get more familiar with the world of front-end engineering, I suggest starting with Next.js, next.js.org, and next.js.org/learn. And if you want to learn more about our Frontend Cloud and start deploying and collaborating on your front-end projects, head to vercel.com. Finally, I believe we have some minutes left for Q&A, so thank you all for coming to the session, and if anybody has questions, we'll be passing a microphone around. Can be any question. Can be about AI, for example.
Hey, thank you for the talk. I have a question regarding AI copilots versus design copilots in Figma, because like this was also a big talk today with Diagram. And I thought maybe in the near future it is easier to build a copilot from text to the real product, which is directly implemented, compared to the challenge to text to Figma design, because there's so much data in the web and lots of products when it comes to headers and different implementations of.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And so to rephrase it a bit, it might be easier to just skip a lot of the processes in between, right? If I can go from text to the actual rendering of the product, we might be able to just even get a higher quality signal or output because we have more information in the process. I agree, and it's really exciting to be exploring this space. Figma also has an internal representation, right, for everything that you see on the screen. So you can think about like text to Figma, text to frontend, Figma to frontend. There's a lot of really exciting possibilities to explore. With AI, the other thing that I think a lot about is, to me, it's like you called it out with Copilot. It provides suggestions. It might not be the fully baked solution, but it gets me to the next step really quickly. So that's also what we're exploring, just like we did with draft mode. What about being able to sort of visualize an idea and then continue coding it? Because it might need some adjustment in abstraction and so on. So yeah, definitely it's one of the most exciting open problems today.
Cool. All right.
Hi, Guillermo. Great
sorry.
talk, by the way. Let me raise this up a little bit. Oh, I'll come down. So, excellent work. Was glad to see you guys start Vercel. Been a fan for you, as I was telling my colleague, for at least 10 years. As someone who leads a design system team who's authored well over 100 components and is supporting literally dozens of projects, we made a decision to kind of standardize close to W3C compliant web components as part of our library. Can you give any indication as to whether Vercel will be moving to support, or may already support it at this point? But what is your opinion about more standards compliant component library support versus something that's very niche to a specific front end framework? Because as we know, we may get bubblegum JS tomorrow. You never know.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things we just talked about is you have to be able to not just make it look good, it has to work well, and it has to respect the abstractions that exist in the code base, which makes the generative AI process a little bit more challenging. One such abstraction that has been emergent in the React world is what we call headless UI. You now have invisible component systems to start with, which is very exciting because they take care of a lot of the issues around accessibility, for example. I think a lot about a quote from Rasmus Anderson about the amount of engineering hours that a context menu took to perfect on the Figma product. And I can strongly relate. It almost seems like every time you start a project, you're reinventing the foundations of each UI component from scratch. That's another thing that React has brought to this world. You started with the headless UI libraries, and now they give you the sort of foundations for accessibility, keyboard support, the right interactions where, like, if I press outside the context menu, it has to hide. If I start typing on macOS, it's expected that it follows what I'm typing, even though it might not actually render it as text. So all these details, you now have this higher level foundations to start from. So my recommendation would be you conceive your design in Figma, and then you take one of these baseline component libraries, and then you adapt your design to those rather than starting over from rediscovering a lot of those, painful parts on accessibility and so on. And the other thing is around performance, right? Your component has to render fast. If your component doesn't render fast, you lose out on a lot of the benefits of higher conversion and so on. So component and design systems is absolutely the right place to start. We've made a significant investment at Vercel in this. You can actually check it out at vercel.com/design. And yeah, I recommend checking out Radix. There's ChatCN UI. There's a lot of really awesome open source starting points for really high level components.
Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent talk. My question is about kind of the idea of engineers, which I assume a lot of people in this room are engineers, like engineers who like design and where these innovations might leave us. So what I kind of got from your talk is that we're bringing engineering to designers is kind of what we're seeing, and hopefully soon, and it already is happening, designers can build real working code without knowing a lot of the intricacies of actually the React components that are being implemented, a lot of that. But myself as an engineer who's always been attracted to design, that's what I've always loved, is like building beautiful components and doing this, and it just seems like more and more I feel like I'm barely coding, I'm just designing. Are engineers who like design just becoming designers, or kind of what's the future of those people?
Great question. You're getting into a hot topic. Perfect. I think it's not just designers can get closer to engineering. I think it's also the opposite as well, which is really exciting in the position that you're in. Because if you have a component library that is really easy to use, and now I have a contextual, I'm going to say AI again, if I have that rich context of what components are available, now you can design something that is statistically good. I don't know if you all remember the CSS Zen Garden, where folks started with the fixed markup, and then they had all these awesome representations of that same markup. That's what really inspires me, because let's get all our data from whatever you need to represent on the screen, Salesforce, CMS, etc. Now I have my components that are coming from my design team. They were really thoughtful about expressing our brand in the correct way and so on. And now I have a pretty good starting point for an AI, or for now, even some autocomplete-based coding to actually create something really good really fast. So that's what I've been noticing recently is it cuts both ways. The engineer can produce something that looks good with not a ton of effort, and then the designer can actually now go and leave comments on that, again, block that CI/CD process. So you're both coming together to build the software and test it out, and then involve QA and beyond that. So yeah, this world's continue to get closer. It's really exciting to see.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a product designer, and I've been using Vercel, or actually ZNet, for a few years now to build my portfolio. And I've always been very impressed by the experience that this Vercel website brought to me. And I wonder, as a CEO, how do you prioritize these delightful moments for your customer? For example, I remember the first time using it, there's no password, and there's like a super easy text on the website and redirect you to your email.
Yeah.
Just click a button and log in. It feels magical. So how do you prioritize these delightful moments, and how do you prioritize the resources to ship this?
Yeah, the short answer would be we always start from the point of view of, and again, we have the bias of this front-end cloud that we're building. What does the customer need? What is the information they give at that given moment? We don't want to render spinners. We want to get you to the information that you want as soon as possible. We want to get you logged in as soon as possible so that we remember who you are. We just launched our Vercel AI SDK. Even the documentation is personalized. The documentation has live components that allow you to prompt engineer from the documentation website. So the short story would be, our aspiration is that website and web application kind of merge into one thing that is just a great dynamic experience. So when I think about a blog post, I think the same way about a login screen. I think the same way about a dashboard and a data visualization. Render them fast, prioritize the end user experience, personalized, true to your design system, delete everything that's not necessary. I got a pitch for our new homepage today, and it had nothing. It was like a white page. I was like, great, let's start from there. So delete all the things that are redundant. This could be an entire new session, but the other thing that you mentioned is because we blurred the lines between design and app, my priority is that interactions are fast. The old cloud was, let's slap a CDN in front. Incredible infrastructure has been built, Akamai, whatever. But what happens when the next interaction happens, the next click? Linear is a great example of this, because I press enter and there is an optimistic mutation to the data I'm rendering as a result of user input without even going to the cloud. So those are the things that I prioritize, is what is the initial loading time, what is the subsequent interaction like, and then gathering feedback from as many people as we can. We're dogfooding our comments product extensively to kind of get even feedback from prospective customers about the new login experience. So hopefully that gives you some ideas.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, folks.